One of the things that I realized is I'm not that wicked smart. And that in fact, I have a lot to learn from a leadership perspective. And one of the things that I began to think about was leadership is really not, it's not about a formal role or an ascribed title. It's really not about going to a training and getting a certificate or even a degree. I mean, I have a PhD in human and organizational systems. It's not even about getting that degree. What leadership is really about is it's about practice. How do you develop yourself as a leader? And realizing it's an ongoing journey. You know, I'm happy you're saying as a CEO now you're figuring some things out. Guess what? That's a great posture because you want to continue to figure things out as you move forward.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart and Hustle podcast. I can't wait to be able to share today's guest with you guys because I have another amazing leader sitting across this digital table with me. I've got the president and CEO of the North American Family Institute, Sir Paul Dann. Welcome to the show. Incredibly excited to have you here.
Thanks, Keenan. I appreciate your kind words. You're almost scaring me a little bit, being so effusive, you know.
You know, one of the things that we talked about in our previous conversation together was, you know, the long time horizon, if you will, or the long runway of our career and how things change, but also how we stay steadfast on that journey. And so one thing that I know is that you didn't just wake up one day and became the CEO of NAFI, but more importantly, you started as a caseworker in the 80s. With a smaller organization, and now you're sitting here as the leader of the organization. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that, Keenan. So, you know, what's interesting is when I started out in the helping profession, I really wasn't sure where I was going to go or what I was going to do, but I knew I wanted to help young people. That was kind of my first choice. And lo and behold, I found this little organization called Northeastern Family Institute, where I got a job as a caseworker working with adjudicated youth, kids that were in trouble with the courts. And my catchment area was East Boston all the way up to the New Hampshire border. And I used to work with these kids to try to help them sort out their challenges and work things through. Now, I went there and I said, I'll stay a year, maybe get some experience, go somewhere else. Well, what's interesting is that little organization, Northeastern Family Institute, grew over time to become North American Family Institute, where I also continued to grow with them over the last, well, it'll be 45 years in April. Can you believe it?
Wow. 45 years. I mean, what an amazing journey. And just seeing how the organization has progressed, but also, you know, some of the challenges, I guess, that you guys are kind of serving and kind of fighting against in the community. You know, I want to kind of double click. I've been having some awesome conversations recently about the role of the family, right, in the American society. What do you think has happened to the family, if you will, over the long years that you've been working kind of in this work in the helping field?
That's a great question, Keenan. You know what's super interesting is what we know about resiliency and how kids bounce back from trauma. And there's a number of ways that happens. And one critical way that it happens is being part of a family and having a family unit that can support you. One of the things that's interesting is I think in our society, families have been really pulled apart by all kinds of things. You know, when I was a little guy, when I was a child growing up, you know, my dad worked and my mom was able to stay home. And that basically was a family unit. They could do their thing. Now, socioeconomically, so many of our families are challenged. Can they make a living wage, for example? If they can, do they have to work a couple of 3 jobs? And just the very fabric of family starts to get pulled apart just by that alone.
And why do you think that's happened? Do you think that, you know, comes some of the macro conversations that happen in society today is, you know, of course, our buying power because of inflation and things have gone down, but also, you know, there's a lot of conversations around kind of corporate greed and things like that, where you see executives of organizations making exponentially more money while the, you know, the income of the common employee hasn't exactly risen. And this is an interesting dynamic. I was born in 1990. And I'm a part of, you know, me and my girlfriend now are thinking about starting a family. Mm-hmm. We're fortunate enough to live in a beautiful place of Honolulu, Hawaii. And so it's incredibly expensive to live here. And we have to think about, like, how are we both going to be able to either make enough money to be able to raise a family and feel comfortable here? That's a lot of stress, right, that comes on the family.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, one thing that I think is a travesty is really the challenges that everyone has in achieving a livable wage in this day and age. When my wife and I were first married, I was working in that job as a caseworker. I was making $7,800 a year. That was my salary. And I said, boy, if we could get to 10 grand, I said, Patty, we're going to be all set. It's going to be great. If we can get to 10 grand. Now, look, $7,800, your eyes are wide open. I can tell you saying, how could you even? Well, we had an apartment. We had a 2-bedroom apartment. We had a car. We were able to go on little vacations, and we weren't living. I mean, we weren't we weren't starving, but we were, and we were living, able to kind of move along. Now, of course, that same salary is laughable. Of course, that's many years ago. But when you look at the way people are paid right now, a lot of young people getting out of school, they're making $20, $22 an hour if they're lucky. That's not enough money to really live on your own successfully. So I think a livable wage is a key issue for people, and I think we've got to pay attention to that. Certainly in the healthcare profession and the mental health field too.
I mean, if you don't mind me asking, at the time of recording this is February 12th is the current date, right? And we've seen, or February 13th, excuse me, day before Valentine's Day. So all the guys out there, if you're tuning into this, make sure, don't forget. One of the things that I think is important for recognize is we've seen administration change, right? There's a lot of pressure on health and human services, like you said, the helping field right now. So as a leader, I kind of want to tap into your mindset about how you're able to navigate an uncertain future when the services that you guys provide in the community are so fundamental towards bringing people together and serving those who are the most in need.
Mm-hmm. Another great question. Look, we're in a time right now that's filled with uncertainty, and it's going to be critically important for all of us to lean into what our core values are, our core beliefs, the missions of our organizations. That's where I think we gain our strength in times that are uncertain. So when we stick with our core beliefs and our core values and work from our mission. So, for example, our mission is to empower people so that they can live in their own home and community successfully. And our values are ones of respect, supporting people, helping them to develop and empower themselves. So we're going to lean hard into that and work on that and not sway from those values, because I think some of what's happening right now is it's a moment in time, and my mother used to say, "This too shall pass." So when you're when you're into tough stuff, I think you got to really stick to your core values, stick to your team, work at what you know is helpful and does the right thing, and then of course communicate with people around the importance of the work. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. I hear a lot of things like, "Well, is this really worth it?" or are they really helping, or what's really happening? So I think a lot of communication would help too.
My father, and as you were saying that, he had a saying when I was growing up, is "this too shall pass," right? And thinking about things on a longer time horizon, kind of as I kind of got started in today's conversation. One of the things that I brought up in our previous conversation and today as well is Napoleon has a quote, is "Leaders are dealers in hope." How are you kind of being a dealer in hope right now? Because people are looking to you as the leader, CEO, president of the organization. How are you kind of being steadfast in the moment of uncertainty? Is it communication? Is it the way in which you continue to show up and do the things that you can control? What does that look like for you?
Well, what's interesting about this question or this comment about being a dealer in hope? One of the developmental assets that supports people in their ability to be resilient is to have hope. That's one of a number of different assets. And so how do you have hope? Well, one way that you have hope is you develop a sense, locus of control. Like we have the ability to do some things. There are things that we can do in this current environment that will continue to advance the important work of North American Family Institute. And like all of our other organizations that are in the helping profession, there's things that we can do in order to move things forward. So locus of control. The other part about hope is being able to help people envision and think about the future. So one of the things that I like to talk about with people is kind of where we are and where we're going to go. And along with that, at the same time, Keenan, is what are our values, as I mentioned earlier. are we going to stay true to who we are from a sense of our values and our beliefs and the mission that we're working from? And then I think the other thing is to reflect back on the way the organization has managed through previous times where there's been some challenges, and to remind people, there may be some uncertainty here, but we've been through difficult times in the past. In 2008 up through 2012, the bottom fell out really in the economy. What's interesting is there was literally no funding to help the kinds of services that we had, or very little. Felt like no funding. And so we pivoted and we managed through that time very successfully. So in a way, we're reminding people, at least on my team, we're saying, look, we're going to be steadfast with our beliefs and our values. We are going to work in a way that keeps us smart, able to pivot, and we're going to continue to communicate and do the things that we know are right.
I want to ask really tactfully how you get a generation of people who are conditioned for instant gratification. And I look at my personal generation, right? The millennials and then Gen Z specifically. We grew up in a world, I was blessed, if you will, to grow up in a world before technology, right? I saw how technology exploded in my lifetime and has become an integral part of everybody's life. If you're listening and watching to this podcast, I guarantee
look at what
your
you're
cell
doing
phone.
right now.
Exactly. There we go. That's a great perspective. But the one thing that I recognize is slowly but surely, right, the way in which we interact with technology has kind of conditioned us and society in general for instant gratification, right? The work that we're doing today, we should see a result by the end of the day, at the end of the week at the very least. So how do you convince and get a generation of people who are used to instant gratification and everything that we do, from interacting on our cell phones to ordering food and having it delivered to our house within 30 minutes, to buy into a long-term vision of sustainability for what you guys are doing in the community?
That's I love that. So here's what it's about, really. What is the normative culture? What is the normative community that you're working from in terms of your organization? Now, that we live in a society of instant gratification. We also know that, particularly if we're talking about helping people advance and do better for themselves, that doesn't happen by a flick of a switch. It's a piece of work. Took us a while to get where we are. It's going to take us a while to get where we're going. So one of the things that's important is to think about what kind of organizational culture do you have that people can become a part of and that they can join. Now, if you create something that's meaningful for people, it's really like what's meaningful for you might be different than what's meaningful for me. But if you create something that's meaningful for people, it has a lot of opportunities for belonging. Like, hey, I can plug in here, or I can help there, or I can do that. And you have those core values that I've been mentioning, and you work from a mission. Everything builds up from your mission. What starts to happen is people start to take on the attitudes, the values, the beliefs, and the behaviors that are connected with being part of that culture. So in a way, we're working, I mentioned it, in my book, I mentioned 8 practice perspectives. And this is one of those. We're actually being anti-gravitational. We're going against the flow, right? And we're taking the long view, which is another perspective that I have. It's not going to happen in a minute, but you're going to join us and you're going to have a way to contribute and feel like you're really part of something and you are part of something that's making a difference.
I want to double click on the anti-gravitational thinking. Let's kind of educate, right, the audience at this point in time on that concept and why it's so important.
Yeah, so what's interesting is you're talking about this society of immediacy. By the way, it's not just the younger generations; it's us old cats too. We want to take a pill and get better. We want to flick a switch and have it. Why isn't this clicker working? We want it all immediately, right? So you could think of that as a cultural flow. That we're all we're just kind of going along, like in a line, like lemmings almost, right? And they say now I've never saw a lemming really, but I've heard they all run together and they're mindless. I've heard they go off a cliff.
Exactly.
Right? You heard that too? I've never seen it. But anyway, what's interesting about becoming anti-gravitational or exercising that mindset or that emotional intelligence is the ability to say, wait a minute, I don't think this flow makes sense for us. I think we should step out of this particular flow, or at least consider why we're doing what we're doing and where we're going. So some of it has to do with mindfulness, being able to sort of be aware of your surroundings and what the process is with the group around you. Some of it is just asking the question. You've probably done that too, Keenan, right? When you're working with people, you go, well, why? Wait a minute. Why are we? Have we thought about why we're doing this? Everyone goes, oh, we haven't thought about that. Well, that's an example of being anti-gravitational.
I want to share a story with you, and maybe you could share your perspective on this. There is a famous experiment, right, where scientists put 4 monkeys in a cage. In the middle of the cage, they put a ladder, and at the top of the ladder, they introduced a stack of bananas. Right, the first time the monkeys crawl up, they go and they eat all the bananas. The second time the scientists put the bananas at the top of the ladder, the monkeys start crawling up. They douse them with cold water and they shock them with electricity. Okay. The next time it happens, they start crawling up. They do the exact same thing. By the third time they introduce the bananas, none of the monkeys will go to the top because they recognize the correlation between the climbing of the ladder and getting shocked and doused with cold water. Yeah. Now, the scientists replace one of the monkeys and they put a new monkey in there. The new monkey starts to climb up. The other monkeys grab it, pull it down, and beat it up. Exactly. If you continue that experiment long enough, there'll be all new monkeys, right, in the actual cage. Now, when the scientists put the banana at the top of the ladder, none of the monkeys crawl up. And the new monkey who gets introduced asks the question, why don't we grab the bananas? And they say, I don't know. It's just something that we don't do here.
That's right.
So do you ever think about how kind of stuck in our ways we might be when it comes to how we operate businesses, how we approach certain situations, that we often go into the conditioned path of it's just always how we've done things, and that anti-gravitational thinking is kind of going against that?
So, Keenan, here's what we're doing. Well, let's take it from monkeys, because I think it's a great example. Let's take it from monkeys and move it to people. And let's talk about social phenomenon. Let's talk about, for example, you probably remember from your intro to Soch course about norms. Norms are unspoken expectations that drive your behavior based on your group membership. Unspoken. In the pure sense, you don't even have to talk about them. Like those monkeys didn't even have to talk. In fact, when they dropped that new monkey, and the new monkey probably looked at the other monkeys and said, I'm doing something weird going on this. I don't think I should maybe go up here because look at the way people are reacting to me. So norms take hold for 2 reasons. One, well, I'm a blues man. So in the words of Howlin' Wolf, we're all built for comfort, right? So in social settings, we're built for comfort. We don't like to stick out. So unspoken expectations that govern our behavior take hold because we're built for comfort. We want to fit in. The other reason that norms take hold is to get things done. So what's interesting is if you can create something of a goal that's meaningful for people, that they're interested in. And again, go back to your values and your beliefs and your mission. If you can do it within the context of that, then these norms, they start to take hold. It's a very powerful phenomenon. Now, I don't recommend throwing water and shocking people. I think that's aversion therapy. But the principle's the same, right? Like, so for example, we have an annual event where we recognize people that we've served for their accomplishments, right? And we get like 250 people together. They all come and we recognize 4 people every year. The one person who's being recognized, the first one, he gets up and says, they make a speech and they talk about what they did and how it made a difference for them and how the agency and the organization helped them. And you see the audience, which is half of them are people that we're serving, and they're all watching. Well, what are the norms? This is a significant event. What are the norms that are being shaped? Well, I can do it. Hope, going back to that in terms of resiliency, locus of control. Wow, here's someone that felt they didn't have control and now they're being recognized. So anyway, long-winded way to say, if you're well, what we say up here in northern New England, if you're wicked smart organizationally, you're going to be able to think about, well, how do we create norms that are positive, that are going to make a difference, that people can connect to and become part of. Am I like Charlie Brown's teacher at this point, or does it make sense? I'm not.
No, it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, this is one of the things that I think I've really started to tap into. You know, I'm 34 years old. I'm the CEO of our company, and one of the things that I recognize is a younger mindset of me as a leader was I needed to have a whole bunch of rules that people followed within the organization. I've started to pivot that mindset to stay, what values can we use as North Stars that will lead us towards the outcomes that we need without having to reference this huge checklist, if that makes sense. And that was a big maturity for me in my kind of maturation as a leader. It's been interesting.
Yeah. Often when I present, I'm up on the board and I might, do a drawing. So I would do a drawing that kind of looks like this, it's kind of like a little comb on its side. And then I would do another drawing that kind of looks like this, it's like, it's got more and more layers to it. And I would ask the group, what are these? And then people would say, I don't know. It's a comb. And I don't know. They would say, I say, no. This is your policy book. When you work from mission and values and sort of you have a compass of where you want. That's your policy book. It's the thinner one. If you have this big, fat, thick one, that's when you're trying to regulate yourself and you're not leveraging the power of a vision, of mission, of norms, that sort of thing. So it's good you're onto that, Keenan.
I mean, it's been a process, right? I mean, a huge process for me is just trying to figure out how I can be a great leader, and this is why I love hosting the podcast because I can speak to leaders like yourself. So, how do you think you've changed, right? Since you were joined the organization back in the 80s, right? Managing a small team that grew to about 450 based on the information you shared. Now you have a team of 1,500, right? A whole bunch of young cats, like you said. How are you how have you changed and morphed, if you will, as a leader, like on this journey? And what are the key things that you've had to change and mold into?
Yeah, I appreciate that question too. Well, one of the things that, I mentioned those two words, wicked smart. One of the things that I realized is I'm not that wicked smart. And that in fact, I have a lot to learn from a leadership perspective. And one of the things that I began to think about was leadership is really it's not about a formal role or an ascribed title. It's really not about going to a training and getting a certificate or even a degree. I mean, I have a PhD in human and organizational systems. It's not even about getting that degree. What leadership is really about is it's about practice. How do you develop yourself as a leader and realizing it's an ongoing journey. I'm happy you're saying as a CEO now you're figuring some things out. Guess what? That's a great posture because you want to continue to figure things out as you move forward. So how have I changed? I think I'm more humble in terms of what I don't know. I'm more inquisitive about what I might need to know. And the other thing that I've begun to really leverage is the importance of what I think about as generative leadership. How do you co-create leadership among your team members? Because it's really not about the positional leader. It's really about everyone else being willing to, take that risk and step up, co-create, be generative in your leadership development. I actually developed a theory and have an assessment tool and everything that relates to generative leadership.
Can you share the theory?
Oh, so, well, it's, I can give you some component parts to it. So what I did was I researched successful leaders across 4 large organizations. I had 27 people that I looked into who were successful leaders. And I basically said to them, how do we develop and create leadership? And I used a research model, qualitative analysis, and came up with a theory that basically says, look, to co-create leadership, you have to really hit it on a number of cylinders. One, you have to create expectations around leadership. In other words, if you and I are part of an organization, I have to be saying to you, no, you're a leader too. I mean, we're all leaders. Just because I'm the CEO doesn't mean, right? So you have to create expectations. You have to build opportunities for people to practice leadership. You have to develop your ability to trust people. And, trust is an interesting thing. We throw it around all the time. And I don't know how much time we have, but I could really get into a whole trust conversation. But you have to develop the ability to have trust. You have to have finely practice communication and expectations. So it's not just about, communications and feedback. So you have to have the ability to have a reciprocal conversation like, hey, you did great, but here's some things that we think we can do better at, right? Those sort of things. So there's component parts to this that once they're in play, what happens is you find out, well, I'll give you an example. This is me. What am I doing? I'm driving home and I'm whistling. I'm so happy. Why am I happy? Because I had this incredible day because I have these great leaders around me. In other words, we've created a team where everybody's, they're hitting on all cylinders and they're connecting and they're thinking about how can we do better and what can we do. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we all got paid for this? This is amazing. Whistling on the way home from work, that's a goal.
I know that you might kind of think like maybe we don't have enough time to talk about trust, but this is something that I think is actually on the front of the mind of a lot of leaders today. And one of the conversations I want to kind of create a little bit of context. I'm kind of at that point in time where I'm seeing a lot of my friends that I grew up with who are young 20-somethings, right, becoming the future leaders of their organization. But here's one of the things that I also recognize. When you're incredibly skilled at performing a task within an organization, right, often you are promoted and ascended.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so one of the things that a lot of my friends, and I speak about this often, struggle with is I do not know how to lead by trusting others because I have the mindset where I could probably do it better than them.
I might as well just do it.
Exactly. I came across a book by an author named Dan Martell who talked about Pareto's principle 80-20, right? He said, although you can get this task done 100% good, what you can do is find somebody who can do it 80% as good as you. That gives you 20% capacity. That 80 plus 20 is 100% awesome. But you have to lean into trusting others to allow them to fail forward, which can be scary for a lot of new leaders. So how do you kind of emphasize that need to trust, if you will? And why is that so important?
Yeah, that's great. So what I do is, first of all, I help people define this word trust, because what happens is we throw it around all over the place. I don't trust you. I don't trust him. Do you trust me? I don't know. I mean, it's all this trust, but we really haven't refined a construct for it. So I want to give a shout out to Patrick Lencioni. Probably you've read some of his stuff, but he originally talked about the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and he's eventually moved it into a highly functional, highly effective teams, the 5 characteristics. One of the ones that he talks about is trust, okay? That's kind of right out of the gate. And what I like about what he does is he breaks it down into a way that you and I could think about it if we're talking about trust together. So he says essentially, and I'm giving you my version of it. He says essentially that there are 3 component parts to trust. So the metaphor for me is like a bar stool with 3 legs, okay? Right? He's picturing a bar stool with 3 legs. Yep. Now, if you're going to have trust, you got to have each of these 3 things. Each of those things is a leg to the bar stool, okay? Now, have you ever tried to sit on a stool that's got only 1 leg? Have you? Yeah, you flop over.
Falling over.
2 legs, forget about it. It ain't going to happen. You got to have all 3 legs. So this is what's nice about this. Keep it simple, right? 3 things. 1, do I trust your intent? That's the first leg of the stool. If Keen, you say you're going to do something and you mean something, do I trust that? Is that true? Or are you hustling me? What's the deal? So 1, trusting intent. You got to be able to trust your team members' intent. Are they all with you? Are they part of the team? Do they, do they really share the mission, or are they just giving you lip service? What's the intent, right? So that's the first leg of the stool. The second leg of the stool is, does the person, or do they have the skills necessary? Right? You're talking about you get promoted and now you were an expert, widget maker, and now you got to let other people make widgets and you're a little worried about it. Do you trust their skill level? Do you think they could hit the 80-20 that you mentioned? And is that enough? So do they have the skills that are necessary? And then the third thing is the follow through. Third leg on the stool. Will they follow through with what they say they're going to do? I know you've met folks, and maybe some of your team meetings, you all talk, get great ideas. You all know what oh yeah, this is great. Oh, wonderful. We kick it all around. Next meeting, oh, well, we don't really do anything with that. We kind of, oh, let's talk about it. But you got to have follow through, right? So those are the 3 legs to the stool. What I love about it, though, is when we say to each other, where are we with trust? How do we rate ourselves with trust? We talk about it in those 3 component parts. And if someone comes to me and says, I just don't trust Jimmy Joe, I'll go, well, what is it for Jimmy? Does Jimmy need training? Or should we have a conversation to kind of see where he's at, kind of what his intent is? And, or does he need some skills to follow through? I mean, sometimes we're asking people to do all kinds of things without the tools, right? So does that make sense, Keenan? Does it help give you a framework?
No, it definitely does. It definitely does. And breaking it down into kind of like those tactful measures, I think is super important, because a lot of leaders who tune into this podcast, like I said, are often struggling, right, with the trust factor, and being able to kind of break it down, those 3 silos is really important. As you were talking there, I couldn't help but kind of think about, as you've been a leader throughout the organization, CEO, president now, you've seen many different generations, right? The young cats who come into the organization. One of my favorite books about leadership right now, there's a guy in New York named Gary Vaynerchuk. Gary V. Have you heard of him on social media?
No.
Okay, so he's a big influencer on social media. He's got a Fortune 50 marketing company, works with the Coca-Colas and stuff like that. And what he says is he's building a honey empire. He said, honey, because I believe in being nice, being candorous, empathy, compassion, all of the soft skills, right?
Yep.
But he said, remember, an empire is also competitive. The next generation does not want to be led like Steve Jobs led the previous generation with an iron fist. They want to be seen. They want to be validated. They want to be trusted. They want to be heard. And so how have you kind of had to mold and shift or even adopt, if you will, those soft skills into your leadership style to meet this new generation of people who have higher expectations for being seen as a human, not being seen as another person in a seat, if you will?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I'm going to be a little anti-gravitational for you right now. So here we go. One of the things that I hear a lot about from my contemporaries is all this generational talk. Well, this generation doesn't do this and that generation doesn't do that. And what about our generation and all that? Well, I say, let's put the brakes on this for a minute. And let's really talk about what it is that's universally meaningful for people. And what you're talking about, Keenan, really is this question of being kind and being supportive and coming at a place of caring for people. Doesn't mean you can't have hard conversations and things like that. Everybody wants that. That's a universal desire. And then, in fact, if someone is in a role of authority and has a position of a executive leadership type thing, and they don't realize that, then they don't have much in the way of emotional intelligence. They need to kind of get their acts together and realize what is it about humankind, human nature that we can leverage and build upon, and that exists across all generations. Now, some of us may be more articulate or more mobile around it, or that kind of thing. But in other words, I'm not going to work for you. I'm out of here if you're not taking care of me. Versus in the old days, they might say, "Oh, I'm going to just stay. I have to stay. What can I do?" Right? So, but you're going to have a win-win if you move into supporting people in a way that builds. I coin a phrase, and I apologize for it. Here's what I say: if we can build the we. If we can build the we, W-E, we. If we can build the we get to we. We get to O-U-I, yes. And so the thing is, I apologize for that. But anyway, the thing is, it's true. If you can get people together to feel part of something, feel like we're in this together without regard to their age and their where they live and kind of what their past experience was. If you can get people to feel that they're part of something, then you'll get to yes. You'll be amazed at what will happen.
I mean, this is the fundamental responsibility, right, of a leader, a CEO, is to cast a vision, right, so big and so great that other highly skilled people can find themselves being successful in the vision that you cast. So how do you consider yourself on a level 1 to 10 of a vision caster for that future that people can get behind? What do you think, Paul?
Well, I just finished saying I'm much more humble now. So not I'm trying to work against that desire to put a 9 in there. But first of all, I see such value in helping people in sense making, to make sense of where we are and where we're going to go. And I see such value in thinking about who we want to be and how we want to be in the world, that I spent a lot of time thinking about that. So, well, you're working from home, so I can't really use this analogy, right? I mean, but if you weren't working from home, let's say you're going to go to a friend's house. When I say you're going to your friend Jimmy's house, now you right away think of his house. And then you kind of work your way back in terms of, all right, how am I going to get there? Now you know. It's the same thing with vision. And it's the same thing with understanding where we want to go. If you lay out a desired state where we want to be for people, then right away that starts to inform what something means, like any particular thing. And it starts to inform what it means. And now if you inform meaning for people, that affects what people believe, which, by the way, in the end, affects their behavior. So you start to get everybody kind of rowing in the same way.
There's one of the soft skills that Gary Vaynerchuk mentions in his book is curiosity,
Mm.
right? One of the things I love asking leaders like yourself about with so much experience in a space, right, is how are you being curious about what the future of technology looks like? Right? We see so many conversations around things like automation and artificial intelligence. Do you think that there's a future for AI in the space of, health and human services, mental behavioral health, the helping sector, right? What do you think that's going to be? And are you curious to kind of explore what the future looks like?
It's interesting. I do believe that technologies. Well, look where we are now. Just if you go back 20 years, we wouldn't be doing any of this, right? And look what happened to all the nonprofits pre-COVID. I mean, those of us that stayed and thrived and were successful, we were able to pivot and we were able to move in a way that leveraged our curiosity. In that case, was out of necessity. But I do think it's important to say, all right, well, what's possible? What are some of the things that we can do or that we might do? I'll tell you, we have some AI policies now. We've had to right away because, for example, did you know that you could have a clinical note written by AI for you for a client? I mean, we're talking about doing mental health treatment. Well, we can't have someone throwing in a couple variables into a thing and writing something that could be wrong because AI at this point has some real.
I was literally thinking about this the other day, Paul. I see a lot of my partners, right, who think about we want to use AI to streamline the clinical documentation process. And I don't know why. As I was lifting in the gym the other day, I went to the place of are we getting to a copy and paste method of documenting an individual, right, through tools like this, and is the appropriate way for us to move in the future like that? It didn't really seem
Yeah, well,
hopeful.
I think there's some real shortcomings to it right now. I mean, first of all, AI still has hallucinations, and a client's records, or it's called hallucinations when it just spews a bunch of stuff out. And a client's record is so critical that it be accurate. Follows them, even though it's confidential. It's part of their life, and that remains to be seen. On the other hand, I don't mind AI if I said, I have a policy. I want to write a policy, rough something out for me. I think that's, that can be wonderful. I would feel sad though if the human touch got lost along the way. We have to keep that in line.
And I feel like that's where we have to be incredibly intentional. I want to use that word intentionally, is we have to use technology as an accelerator to put the human in the human seat to do the things that truly matter and create that sense of connection rather than just offloading, if you will, kind of technology and saying, hey, it's going to handle everything. That doesn't seem like a world we really want to live in.
No, I agree with you. We got to people first. I think that's the key thing. Certainly in the work that I do as a behavioral health and an educational and social service organization, it's always we have to think about the people. That's at the heart of it.
So, I was a lifelong baseball player. I played in college at a school in South Carolina.
Nice.
And I love to use the analogy. And because you're a North New England guy, Babe Ruth was really big for me in my career.
Yeah.
And I loved how it's a famous clip of him calling his shot to center field and then hitting that home run. I want to give you an opportunity, Paul, to call your shot for the rest of 2025. What are you guys hoping to accomplish? And what's a home run look like for you guys in serving your community?
Oh, that's great. Well, what's so interesting is we're operating in 9 different states now, and we have 126 services. And as you mentioned earlier, about 1,500 employees across 5 corporations, all sister corporations that are very connected to the localities and their communities. So a home run for us really is to continue successfully to meet the needs of the people that we serve in their locality, and they're all different, Keenan. I mean, for example, we have this really cool service called the Youth Police Initiative. I don't know if you've heard about it. But what we do is we get police departments together with young people from the city, the same cities. We get them together and we run them through a process of getting to know each other, talking about the people side of things. And what's so powerful about this, Keenan, is that the kids come out going like, wow, this police I could consider him a friend, right? Then that's like a complete change in their attitude from what they had experienced before. And the police come out of it going, wow, I see myself in that child. And what's been interesting, and we've had some research done about it, what's been interesting is crime in those communities among the juveniles, adolescents, goes down significantly where we're exercising. So it's a promising practice that does. So that's one service. So if I was Babe Ruth pointing to one corner, we just have a contract now in Missouri doing this, and they've launched their cohorts, and they're doing a great job. The Babe Ruth home run for that one would be finishing that contract with some positive outcomes. But that's just one of our services, right? Yesterday, I was at one of our services called Ferry Road. It's over in Massachusetts, and it's a program for people with acquired brain injury. Very specialized. I mean, these are folks, you'd love to meet them. They're very amazing. A guy 29 years old gets in a motorcycle accident who now has acquired brain injury and is paralyzed, but is living his life and growing and making connections and learning things, even though he's got this brain injury that he's dealing with. A Babe Ruth home run for that would be for him to have some extra time with his wife, his loving wife that still comes and sees him. And I mean, there's so many layers to that question. So,
well, I think you called some amazing shots there, as we kind of go through 25. So, Paul, one of the traditions we have here on the podcast is our previous guest wants to ask you a blind question. Our previous guest is a leader in the social services and the helping space, if you will, down in Alabama. And her question was an interesting one. I want to get your perspective.
Oh, interesting.
So,
interesting.
I know interesting. So later today, Paul is given $1 million in cash. He cannot spend it on anything for himself nor for his organization, but he has to help others. What is Paul spending that money on?
Oh, well, I got one right out of the box for that right away. So when I don't know if you know, but I'm a professor also at the University of New Hampshire. So I had this fantastic student. She was an amazing student. Great. Graduated, went on and did incredible work with the homeless population at the Concord Homeless Coalition. Fantastic woman. Keenan, she passed on precipitously. It was just like out of the blue. It was unbelievable, and it was so hard. But I'll tell you what, she was the outreach worker there in this organization, Concord Coalition to End Homelessness. And what I would do with that $1 million is I would take it right over there, because there's such a homeless problem all around, and I would give it in honor of Julie.
Paul, one thing that I would love for you to be able to do is, why don't you plug your book, and so people can learn more about your philosophy, the amazing writing that you've done. Why don't you share that for a second?
Oh, thanks, Keenan. I appreciate that very much. What I've done is I've taken all my decades of experience and I've written a book called Managing and Leading Nonprofit Organizations, A Framework for Success. And you can find it anywhere, on Amazon, all those kinds of things. Gotten great reviews. The idea is I've written it in a way that's sort of like a home improvement book. In other words, you can go to any chapter that you need. Like if you get a home improvement book and you got plumbing leaking, you're not going to start with electricity. You're going to go right to the plumbing. So in this one, if you have trouble with your team or if you're trying to figure out how to do strategic planning, you can go right to that chapter.
Paul, it's easy to understand why you are the definition of Hart and Hustle. You've demonstrated that tenfold today. I can't thank you enough for, your examples on leadership, talking about casting a longer vision for the future, getting the young cats to buy into what the future of what the impact is that you guys are going to be doing. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, man. It means a lot.
I'm happy to be here, Keenan. I appreciate your time.